Welcome to Revolution Against Evolution. I'm your host, Doug Sharp.
I'm your co-host, Rich Gear, here as well. We have a pretty interesting subject tonight. I like your title, No Aquariums on the Ark. What is that all about, Doug?
Well, we had a show a while back, maybe a couple of years ago, called Sloshing Manure in Seasick Elephants. Do you remember that?
I do remember that, yeah.
And it's sort of like there's certain arguments that evolutionists use that we've debunked over the years. There was a book that was written by John Woodmorappe. He's a creationist who wrote a book, Noah's Ark, a Feasibility Study. And so I would like to address the whole thing about fish. And
sea-dwelling creatures, I guess.
Sea-dwelling creatures and Noah's flood. And, why we... but one of the arguments that comes up is that they insist that the ark wasn't big enough to hold all the species.
Yeah, how do you fit a whale on the ark,
Right, and so there were dinosaurs or anything like that. So all those questions, if you understand the biblical model and know a little bit about what the possibilities are,
and what the text actually says, by the way,
and just do a little bit of thinking, it makes it easy to refute these ideas that the ark wasn't big enough for all the animals. And if you take into account 34,000 species of fish,
a lot of fish.
There were no aquariums on the ark. Why would you take the fish on the ark when they're sea-dwelling creatures? Now, during the flood, there were a lot of burial of these sea-dwelling creatures.
A lot of them died, but you got to figure this, Doug. If God only took 2 of certain kinds of animals and maybe up to 7 of certain other ones, the idea that many fish may have died or sea-dwelling creatures died in the waters is not surprising, but that there would be many that survived, or at least 2 of each kind.
Right. Yeah.
I can't imagine that He did not make provision. I know that sounds like God of the gaps type thing, but it's a reasonable inference from the fact that only 2 were required on the land-dwelling creatures on the ark, and I guess that goes to the argument about sea-dwelling creatures in the first place. Only land and air, people that breathe air for their substance, basically from the atmosphere, were taken on the ark.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. You didn't have sea-dwelling creatures on there, and so the idea of a blue whale on the ark is ludicrous. Even to the law, you don't really need guppies, sea-dwelling creatures of that nature on the ark. Yeah. The other thing you did address, this is not a sea dweller, but it's about the dinosaurs, and we've talked about that many times over the years. And it has to do with speciation and kind. A lot of it has to do with how many kinds of animals have to be on the ark. You don't need every cattle type of creature on the ark. You just don't need that. You need 2 of the kind, and God picked it out as far as we can understand. He's the one that brought the ones in there.
And the whole deal with that is that when God created these creatures, so they were robust enough so that they had all the genetic information at the family level to propagate the different varieties and species from those particular kinds.
Like for instance, these 2 dinosaurs, they're long neck, long tail type things. They're very different in a lot of respects, but for all we know, these could have been part of the same family of kind. We don't know.
Yeah,
there are differences that are substantial, but they probably are different they're different as far as at the species level, but at the family level, no, maybe not so much. But that's a dinosaur thing, and we didn't get into a lot of other things because we want to deal with the no aquariums on the ark. The idea, there's another argument, Doug, that comes up, and you mentioned it earlier. What about the difference between freshwater and saltwater fish? How did the freshwater fish survive in the saltwater oceans?
Right, and so we have to take what we have currently and extrapolate back genetically to where it was at the time of the flood, and you would understand that the most likely the oceans at the time of the flood were fresh water, and that the salt content came from the flood itself.
Right, and we realize this is an extrapolation, but it's a reasonable one. And the idea, and the other thing, Doug, that we were talking about this a little before the show, and you maybe elaborate on it a little bit more, is that many animals have the ability to adapt to different kinds of environment. Genetic triggers get turned on and off depending on the environment they're in. And I imagine that, of course, as we said, many millions of these fish and sweet-dwelling creatures were killed, but that there are survival mechanisms. We've seen, let's say, the crocodilian, which is not fish, but they're brackish. They can live in brackish water, salt water, or even freshwater crocodiles. There's different things that happen that switches get turned on and off. This is not evolution, by the way. These are things programmed in the genome.
Epigenetics.
Epigenetics is what it's called. Yeah, environment can trigger things, and we're very familiar. People don't maybe realize they're familiar with epigenetics, but why do you think people want you to stay away, human beings, from carcinogens? This is a bad epigenetic, but you smoke cigarettes, a cancer thing can rise up and other things, or it can trigger things that cause emphysema or even heart disease. These are bad ones, but they're not always bad. There are things that are designed to help you in certain environments, and to us who serve a creator who is omnipotent and omniscient, I would think, I was an artist, Doug. I prepare things in advance when something goes wrong, or something is done outside of my purview, and I'm not omniscient by any stretch of the imagination. So a creator God who is making these things, he is the one who set the standard, told Noah how to build the ark, what size to build it, and sent the animals to the ark. But mechanisms to adapt seem to me would be prevalent, or at least very readily available at some point during the floodwater time, I would guess.
Well, let's clear up something that you just said.
Okay, did I screw up again?
Yeah, you screwed up.
Dog, I always do this.
But let's talk about epigenetics and the mechanisms that cause cancer, because they're two different things.
Well, I'm not. I just use that as sort of a corollary, kind of as a kind of.
So let me clear it up, okay?
Okay, all right.
Epigenetics is something that God created, where certain characteristics are turned on or off, and that's part of God's design.
Yeah,
the cancer stuff is where the genome is actually damaged, and you have a mutation.
Yeah.
And so something is not functioning the way it was originally designed.
Right, but something gets turned on, something are turned off. It's something in your mechanism. Yeah, because it is damaged. It is not the same in the sense that it's a productive thing, and I agree with you on that. I was only trying to give an example so people can understand out there that things can be changed. Okay, and it doesn't mean that's evolution. That's really all I was trying to say there.
But the cancer type of mechanisms that are damages to the genome are opposite of what evolution wants to.
Exactly right. That's true.
They're not creative mechanisms that bring about new features of the genome, and that's one of the things I'm going to talk about. Is that there's like 34,000 different varieties of fish, and then many of them display unique features that are only attributable to special creation. And if you take my book, Revolution Against Evolution, I've got about 4 or 5 examples of these that are pretty interesting. We have the archer fish.
Yeah.
The archer fish has a little groove in his mouth. Now, you have to understand if you're that it's used to spits water at flying creatures, like flies or things like that, and shoots them out of the air, and they go and eat them. And so what you need to do then is, as an evolutionist, to demonstrate that this particular feature came about through evolutionary process.
Right.
So you would have to identify the fossil features that may have preceded it. There is no fossil record that shows this feature coming about by chance. So either it exists and it works, or it doesn't exist.
It's the old thing where either everything works or nothing works.
That's right.
Okay.
You have the angler fish. The anglerfish is a pretty interesting creature. It lives in the great depths, but it has a little lure that it dangles in front of its mouth.
Oh yeah, I know what you want. Yeah.
And the interesting thing about that is that the male of the species does not eat.
Oh, huh?
It does not eat. What it does is that there, by a special mechanism, it hooks up to the female and is fed intravenously.
So it's almost like a parasite.
It's almost like a parasite.
Wow.
And so a male anglerfish is totally dependent on the female, and then the female has this little dangly thing, and it's a pretty bizarre looking fish.
Yes, it is. I've seen pictures of the anglerfish. It's really. I like the next one though. Or do you have more to say on the anglerfish or the?
Yeah, the anglerfish and the decoy fish are quite similar. But the decoy fish has a fin that looks like a fish.
Yeah. I did an illustration for that book years ago.
Yeah.
With that, yep.
And then there's the anableps. The anableps.
Yeah, explain this one by evolutionary processes. This
Right.
is,
The anableps it lives on the surface, and so it has an eye that's split into the eyeballs are split in half. Well, the top half looks up above the water, the bottom half looks down below the water, and they're different lens magnifications.
I know they could see both above the water. Can they see above the water and below the water at the same time?
Yes, exactly.
You can. Oh wow. Okay.
And so if you can go over in Bruce Pets and see these.
Yeah.
See the anglerfish.
It's a local pet store, but it's got really exotic type of creatures there. It's a really neat. So we're giving a free plug for Bruce Pets down there. It's in what, Grand River? It's off of North.
Yeah, it's down in Old Town.
Old Town, yeah. It's pretty neat.
And so it's kind of amazing is that you have these creatures that, and you can do this with practically any creature in the world that has some special characteristics like this, and because the evolutionists have the burden upon them to explain these creatures from an evolutionary standpoint, because their paradigm demands that these features came about by a random chance process, by mutations.
Right.
And they fail to take into account that mutations are destructive. Now, to demonstrate that, you can have maybe a scientist, and his challenge would be to actually radiate himself to get some mutation.
Bad idea. Yeah.
So that he could improve his thing, and maybe he can then breathe underwater or something of that sort. Maybe you can.
I know the old remember the old 50s sci-fi movies. Some radiation would create a giant bug or monster, or in the comic books you created a Spider-Man, a radioactive spider,
that's right.
bit him. Tell you what, radioactivity does not do a good thing like that. It always.
Doesn't.
So it's interesting. The Tobey Maguire Spider-Man, they made it a genetically engineered spider, which is about as non-productive as a radiation one. But the point of it is, you can irradiate yourself all you want. How many generations of fruit flies have they tried to do that to make something happen?
Oh yeah, and
I mean thousands, and nothing comes out of it.
Yeah, you get the ones with double wings or stunted wings, or eyes are weird, or
Stuff growing out of different parts of your body, or
so they don't survive very well, and so it's
or at all,
pretty tough thing like that. But and so the evolutionists have this unenviable task of explaining these features by each of these by showing through the fossil record a series of descent. Then you have to also show the DNA coding of these features through genetics without special design. And what is called evolution is really the elimination of species over the course of history.
And the downgrading, mutation is the downgrading of the genome. Pretty much, it's bad. You either delete. Maybe if you get change, it's even productive or at least valuable. It's change that's been reshuffled or deleted information, but the additional mutation adding something does not improve the genome. It does not make it good. At best, you have neutral. They talk about supposedly some beneficial mutations, but these beneficial mutations seems to me
consequences.
They have consequences, and outside of certain environments are not beneficial. We talked about an easy one in a gross morphological sense is a blind fish in a black cave.
Right.
Well, they're king in that environment. But do you think having no eyes is an advantage? Well, it is in that environment. But the reality is, put them out in a seeing eye world, up where there's sun and not what there is food.
That's right.
Or the idea of sickle cell anemia. That's a beneficial mutation. Yeah, you don't get malaria, but you die because you're sickly. Things like that is what oftentimes is brought up. I can't think of one. I'm not saying there isn't any, but but one mutation that you can see that was demonstrably beneficial to the organism, makes it better than it was before.
Let's take, for example, antibiotic resistance.
That's another one. Yeah.
Okay. Dr. Jerry Bergman talks about this. He says what it is the bacteria have a certain mechanism which it allows introduction of fluid.
Yeah, it allows them to absorb nutrients.
Allows it to absorb nutrients. But what happens in a resistant bacteria is that it's lost through mutation, it's lost the mechanism to absorb this nutrient, and thereby it can't pull in the antibiotic.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's sort of like taking your lock and to your door, and filling it full of solder, and we've got it open all the time, and so you're not going to have any trouble getting in and out because the lock's full of solder.
Yep.
But it's really defeated the purpose of the lock itself.
Well, to me, it's more like if you have the door is locked and the lock is full of solder, but it's locked.
Yeah, that's right.
You can't get in or out. Okay, right. And that's the nutrients. They can't get in or out. I remember one time I talked to a doctor, and I said, "Doc, I've been reading about this antibiotic resistance stuff, and it seems to me this is not about a beneficial or making these bacteria stronger, but they're actually kind of weak because it seems they've lost their ability to absorb nutrients." And I said, and he said, "Well, that's exactly right. It seemed to me it might be wiser if they will never do this, but maybe take hospitals and close a couple of hospitals down for an entire year, let the normal bacteria outcompete them, destroy the antibiotic resistant ones because they will outcompete them,
right.
and then you go in and sterilize them, and all the non-antibiotic resistant ones will just pretty much die, and you'll kill 99.9% of them off again. You'll have a good hospital for another 50 years, But and he says, that's actually not a bad idea. He told me. He said that's actually. He says they'll never do it. I said the other thing, or else maybe you should go out if you get sick and roll around in the dirt. He goes, "Yeah, I know that sounds bad, but it's almost not wrong." So it was kind of because there are probably other bacteria things that might be out there. The point of it is what you're saying about antibiotic-resistant bacteria is another example of supposed beneficial. These are stronger bacteria in a sterile environment. They're king, just like the blind fish is king in a black cave or dark cave. But in a normal world, they will be outcompeted. Only in hospitals do they survive. To do much damage, like MRSA and all those kinds of, and they keep giving you stronger antibiotics, which can work to a point, but ultimately, it's getting to a point that the hospitals are told, and doctors have said, yeah, they're getting so. These antibiotics are so strong, they're going to hurt the organism more than they're going to kill the antibiotic or kill the bacteria.
It turns out I had an experience with that.
Oh, you did? That's right. Ago. Tell about that,
Where I had prostate biopsy went septic, and I had an E. coli infection. And so I was in the hospital for a week, but they had to give me intravenously a special antibiotic that killed this off because it was resistant.
Yes.
And so I know very well what that's like. And I was going to get back to some of the fish here.
Okay, we did a little circulatory thing. We're going to get back to the fish and about no aquariums on the air.
One I want to talk about in particular, and that's the flying fish.
Yep, I saw that at the bottom here. Yeah, we did talk about that. Okay.
And so there's like all these different mechanisms for flight that supposedly evolved on their own.
I was going to talk about that too. Not about the flying fish, but the idea of convergent evolution. Is that where you're going to go?
That's where I'm going to
All right, go for it.
So we have bumblebees, we have insects, we have birds, we have bats.
We have pteranodons. We had,
and we have flying fish, which they actually glide on their fins, and so they have these long aerodynamic fins that they jump out of the water and escape their predators, and so it's kind of fun to watch them if you've ever been on a cruise.
Yeah.
They'll be flying around the boat.
Have you ever seen them? I've never seen them.
I have seen them.
Oh, yeah, I would love to see. I've seen dolphins, but they jump out of the water too.
Yeah,
but
right.
yeah.
And that also and so the problem is that you have all these different four mechanisms, which would say that the flight had to have been evolved 5 different times.
Yeah.
In different ways in order for the same feature to come about. And
in fact, Doug, correct me if I'm wrong here, and he will. Each of these different flight mechanisms, they're not even genetically close. They're just different. The way they're made are entirely different genetically. They're not.
Now, here's the way I look at it. Okay, and let's look at it through the glasses of the Bible and God and Him as Creator, and me as a computer programmer.
All right.
If you're going to have a feature that works very well, and you design it. You actually have a submarine. You have a little section of code that gives you the instructions to make it.
Okay.
And this is once you study this biochemistry of this, you should look at it with biblical glasses and find out, well, this is how God designed things. He would use certain features like this elsewhere in the various things that he created. But it all points to that one designer, that one programmer who put together that this mechanism of flight.
So, Doug, this is where you talk about your worldview and your perspective. Do you believe in a common ancestor for everything or a common designer for everything?
I would say it's common design.
I would too, but obviously we would. But this is what glasses do you put on? What lens do you look at things?
Now, it could be a common ancestor in some cases, okay?
Yes, but
they would be in the family level, and
correct.
And these particular species share this characteristic because that's what they descended.
Because that's the other thing we found out, and even people look at the genetic code of the family, there are certain lines of demarcation which, even though we find similarities because we're all in the same world, we're in the same biosphere, if you will, but so we breathe the same oxygen, drink the same water, but
and eat the same kind of food.
Kinds of foods, yeah, but a reptile never turns into a mammal.
Right.
Or a bird. An amphibian never turns into a reptile, and a fish never turns into an amphibian. There's lines of demarcation which are not breakable,
Now, have you ever had octopus?
I have. I have. It's not bad. The kind I've had has been pretty good. Sometimes it gets a little squishy. When you bite on it, tastes like,
if it's cooked wrong, it's
wrong. It tastes like rubber.
Rubber, yeah.
A little squeak there when you eat it.
But there's similarities between the octopus and us because the eye is very similar.
Yes, absolutely.
But the question is, if God made these things, He made it so that they could become food for the other creatures, and the food had to be of the same base materials. You can't have it silicon-based.
Silicon-based that's why there's basically what? There's you got the DNA code.
Right.
It's all there's four basic pairs.
So if you break it down far enough, it becomes similar enough where it can all be food, and that it's where the fallacy of saying that apes and humans are 98% similar, because if you slice and dice the DNA into little sections far enough, you can make them all match up. And that's really where it came from. Is that they used one of them as a scaffold, and then they matched the pieces of the.
That's a dirty little secret. But the other thing, Doug, I've always been, to me, you just look at it common sense wise. My friend used to call it ghetto theology or ghetto reason. But it's like, on the one hand, they tell you how close apes are to humans, and on the other hand, they tell you how Homo erectus is so far different.
Right. Yeah.
I go, wait a minute. Homo erectus is fully human. Where an ape is an ape, okay? A gorilla is a gorilla, and they make one closer. So which side of the mouth are they talking out of, Doug? It depends on which thing they want to come up, and they want to prove how far away you are from your distant evolutionary ancestors, or how really close you are to the ape itself, which is demonstrably different than a human being. Okay.
Now, what this really reveals is that the attitude of the heart. People will come up with these excuses. I call it Great White Throne practice.
Okay.
Where they're going to practice what they're going to say to God when they meet him at the Great White Throne, and they have all these excuses why they didn't trust and believe in them, and so it's really a very shallow field of logic that they use to make an excuse that they don't want to believe in Bible. And if they take a look at the flood, there's a motivation that they have. They don't want to think about the fact that God once judged the entire world because the entire world was sinful. They don't like that. And it's a hard teaching.
It is.
If you take a look at the reality of things, you have all the flood legends that talk about it. And so there's a lot of things to back up the Word of God scientifically and through the lens of creation. And so that is something that really makes it possible for us to understand how people come across who really don't want to believe in God. So you got something there, Rich?
Well, I'm trying to find it. I think 1 Peter talk about they're willingly ignorant that the world was once in water and was judged by water. That was right. I think it's in 1 Peter, but so when you try to find it, this version, I don't have all my underlines in it.
And then in Romans 1 verse 20, it talks about that everyone really has in their heart, they know about God.
Yes.
But they refuse to acknowledge him as God. Neither they are thankful, but instead they find an excuse to carp about God and really not want to believe in him.
Yeah, here it is. It says it talks about Christ's suffering, but it says, "For by whom he went, preached the spirits in prison, who formerly were disobedient when the divine long-suffering waited in the days of Noah while the ark was being prepared, in which a few, that is 8 souls, were saved through water. This is also an antitype which now saves us, baptism, not the removal of filth in the flesh, but the answer of good conscience towards God through the resurrection of Jesus Christ." I was trying to think, they're willingly ignorant that the world that once was perished. It was in water and out of water. I can't remember, and this is not quite the one. I thought there was the one talked about that, but it didn't. So we'll pass on that one. But
we'll have to leave you right now.
Yeah, we're getting to the end of the show, right?
Yeah, we'll see you next time on Revolution Against Evolution.